Hi, my name is Jim McGrath. We're here with another of a series of shows on the Missoula Peace Network. Today we'll be talking about the environmental consequences of the war in the Gulf. Modern warfare is devastating to the environment, and the Pentagon has been exempted from environmental concerns, and its toxic byproducts are considered standard operating procedure. The long-term consequences of the ecological warfare in the Gulf are as yet uncalculable, but it could be enormous. We're going to talk some about that today. We'll start with Vicki Watson, who is a faculty member in the Environmental Studies program and Botany Department at the University of Montana.
Okay. The Gulf War has taught us some lessons that have been there for us to learn from every war that's been fought by humanity. They were there in World War II and the Korean War, but not well heeded. They were beginning to be recognized in the Vietnam War and the wars that have been fought in Central America since then. But the Gulf War was probably the first war after the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, and people were awareness and concern about the environment was greatly heightened before that war took place. And as a result, I think for the first time that lesson has really come to reach into people's hearts and minds. That lesson is simply that no one ever wins a war, because the earth and all of its inhabitants really lose every war that's ever fought. The ecosystems that we and all other organisms depend on are damaged or sometimes destroyed, for our lifetimes at least, by wars. In addition to the destruction of ecosystems, humans are killing their fellow human beings, killing their brothers, essentially. And as a result of that, and as a result of the destruction of the support systems, the air and land and water and biological organisms that all humans depend on, when we kill our brothers and destroy their support systems, we essentially create division and hatred that last for at least a generation, and as a result makes it nearly impossible for us to work together on building a sustainable future. And it will require a rather unified global society working towards some fairly clearly defined goals for us to have any hope of building such a sustainable future. So with that little introduction, I would like to go ahead and point out some of the impacts to ecosystems, particularly aquatic ecosystems, of this war. But it really is simply a case study for any war, because there's no place to fight a war where you won't be destroying ecosystems. I thought first I'd sort of locate us on a map showing Asia and Africa, and then zero in a little more exactly on a small map of just the Persian Gulf area. See this map of Asia over here and Africa just off to the side. And here we have the large Saudi Arabian peninsula.
Excuse me, Vicki, could you carry that mic with you, please? Thank
you. To locate us, point out that this is Asia and Africa, the Saudi Arabian peninsula. Here is mountainous Iran, and here is low-lying, rich Iraq, and the Persian Gulf, just down here at the bottom of Iraq. And this topographic relief map shows how Iraq is actually a rich river valley system. A number of rivers, rather famous rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that formed the rich river valley where civilization had its start and agriculture had its start. Some folks feel that this area was probably the image that gave rise to the image of the Garden of Eden. And so the Tigris and Euphrates rivers drained this rich, fertile valley called Iraq into the Persian Gulf. And I'll switch over to a little bit closer up shot. This is a map of the area that I just showed you. Here we have, once again, in pink is Iraq and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flowing into the head of the Persian Gulf, and this is Iran over here. And this area is like many parts of the world where the land meets the sea. It's one of the most productive environments on Earth, and a number of those environments are of global significance as far as maintaining the species that use those environments are concerned. This entire area here at the mouth of these rivers is made up of marshes and wetlands that are of global significance, marshes and mudflats. And these are the important overwintering areas and also nesting areas for various species of waterfowl and organisms that use the mudflats, all sorts of crustaceans and other aquatic life that use these mudflats as important nursery areas. In addition, in the Gulf, we have a lot of sandy beaches along the two sides of the Gulf here. These sandy beaches are nesting habitat for endangered sea turtles. Both the green turtle and the hawksbill turtle use those sandy beaches to nest in. And in addition, the Persian Gulf sports a number of rather endangered habitats and organisms that use those habitats, particularly here in this bay, but in additional small bays along the edge of the Persian Gulf. We have mangrove forests. Mangroves are a kind of tree that grows right down at the water's edge and are very important nursery areas. The area around the mangrove's roots is very shallow coastal waters and just becomes a rich nutrient soup-like broth where all sorts of fish and shellfish, where their babies, they're called larvae, live and are able to grow up to a certain size when they're able to then swim out and join the larger organisms at sea. So these mangrove swamps, and just offshore we have seagrass beds. And seagrass beds are simply areas where a kind of aquatic plant grows in very shallow water, and they're very rich, productive areas, and the seagrass are important food sources for the turtles, the sea turtles, and also for an interesting marine mammal called the dugong, which is sort of like our manatee and is very endangered, and there are several populations along the coast here. In addition, another important habitat that's rather rare in the world, the coral reef. There are coral reefs in the just offshore in this shallow sea known as the Persian Gulf, and in fact there's one coral reef that's right along this shore here, just off of Arabia. And one of the reasons that we're very concerned about the impacts of the Persian War is that this, of course, this entire area was very disturbed during the war because of the bombing and shelling that went on, scaring these organisms that lived in this area. There are many oil wells burning in this area, creating all sorts of black smoke, which Jim's going to talk more about later. But one of the things that we were very concerned about was a large oil spill. And actually there were probably a number of small spills in addition to one large intentional spill that the Iraqi military has been blamed for, in which a large amount of oil was released in this approximate area and started migrating down the coast of Saudi Arabia, first along Kuwait and then down Saudi Arabia. This coral reef, of course, was in the path of that oil well, and some of it has already been covered and gummed up. These sandy beaches where the sea turtles nest are being affected by that oil slick, and ultimately the oil slick may come down and affect the mangrove areas and the seagrass beds in this area as well. The Persian Gulf, of course, has suffered a lot of impacts over the years. It is considered to be one of the most polluted bodies of water of its size in the world. Because of the development of oil in this area, there have been many past spills in the Persian Gulf. And in addition, during the Iran-Iraq War, there were quite a few large spills associated with offshore oil rigs being blown up, with tankers being blown up, and so on. So there are already a number of oil spills which did result in the death of many of the marine mammals and sea turtles and many waterfowl in this area. In addition, I'll just mention that while we tend to think of the Gulf as being the place where oil comes from, for the people who live there, it's their home, and many of the people depend on some of these natural ecosystems along here to provide them with food, in addition to these habitats that are so important to wildlife that I've mentioned here. The Persian Gulf is also supports a major fishery. It both fin fisheries and shell fisheries that are not only exported from the area and provide a source of income, but are also one of the most important sources of protein in the diet of many people who live along the Persian Gulf here. To bring this back a little bit and relate it to humans, I also want to mention that this part of Iraq here, which is sometimes, as I said, the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys, is also a fairly important agricultural area, and was fairly important in supplying that area with some of its food, and also perhaps some of the surrounding areas with some of its food, although admittedly for the most part the area around the Gulf does import quite a lot of food as well. But if there is such a thing as a breadbasket in the Persian Gulf area, then this area probably was the breadbasket, despite the fact that the long-term irrigation in this area had built up a lot of salinity in the soil and decreased its productivity. It still was a fairly important food source for the people of this area. So those are some of the impacts the direct impacts on aquatic ecosystems in the area. I guess I also would like to point out that any war of this magnitude that invested this much in the way of human and natural resource capital and just money capital as well, has tremendous indirect effects as well out of the country that are associated with the fact that all those resources were poured into a war and therefore were not available to invest in peace, to invest in rebuilding our society, rebuilding and helping third world countries toward a more sustainable sort of economy. We squandered it all on a conflict that will just breed more conflict rather than investing it in peace and a sustainable future. So probably those are going to be treated by the other panelists in some detail as well, and I'll hand it back to them. I'm unfortunately going to have to dash to another meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Vicki. We appreciate that you could be here and for the short period of time. Now we're going to have J.V. Bennett, who's a University of Montana student and activist, tell us about some of the environmental impacts of the military as informed sources were able to speculate even before the war started.
Yeah, so a lot of my information comes from the Political Ecology Group based in San Francisco. And it's a useful source for information if you want to find out something later. Before I start, I'd like to say that as far as I'm concerned, it's not terribly important to figure out who's to blame for this war and the ecological consequences of it. It doesn't particularly matter to me whether it's the fault of President Bush's policies or whether it's the fault of Saddam Hussein's policies or somebody else, the oil companies. The point is that war, as Vicki pointed out, is a bad idea and a luxury that we can ill afford on this planet anymore. We cannot use war to solve our differences because every time we do, we endanger all of our survival on this planet. The other thing I'd like to say is while I'm talking about the effects of the war in the Persian Gulf, I think it's important to imagine what it's going to be like to live in the Persian Gulf in the future. What it's going to be like for a farmer who lives in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. What it's going to be like for a Kuwaiti. What it's going to be like for the nomads in the area. Simply, it's not going to be pleasant. And I think it's useful for us to make that leap of imagination so that this isn't just information that you're watching on some video box somewhere, but has some bearing to the real world because this really is happening. First off, there are certain impacts that an army has just by being there, even if not a single shot is fired. The United States Army is one of the world's largest producers of chemical wastes, or toxic wastes in general. They produce more toxic waste than the 4 largest corporate producers of toxic waste. Moreover, the military is exempted from many of the environmental safeguards that corporations and individuals have to abide by, which is a problem. It's led to a lot of problems in the past with nuclear facilities and is likely to lead to a lot of problems in the future, particularly because the Bush administration is attempting to use this war as an excuse to weaken environmental safeguards even further, which is something I'll get back to. In addition to the effects of chemical waste, which include solvents, oils, because there's so much sand in the desert, surprise, surprise, the machines run a little rougher, so they're using a lot more oil in the machines, and they're emptying this oil out and putting new oil in, and it's going on frequently. And another thing that an army produces beyond toxic wastes are human wastes. The 400,000 American soldiers, plus whatever number of Allied soldiers and Kuwaiti soldiers were in the area, produce a lot of chemical waste, and there are no established sewers in the area. The United States government has an ongoing policy that whenever we go in to help in an area, the nation that's being the host nation, as they call it, is responsible for the waste that the Army produces. As near as we can tell, all that's being done is it's just being dumped into the desert. The Saudi Arabian government does not seem to be doing anything special or adequate, for that matter, to deal with the human and toxic wastes involved with an army. Another thing that an army does, even if it doesn't shoot anything, is move around in a desert. And when an army moves around in a desert, it causes a great deal of destruction. Deserts are not lifeless places. There's a great deal of life in a desert. And because desert environments are so harsh, so extreme, the grip this life has is very fragile. And when we go zooming around there in our neat new tanks and jeeps and practice using our weapons, the structure of the soil gets disrupted. The few plants that are there that hold down the sand are damaged or destroyed, uprooted. And the sand dunes themselves have a special shape that has developed in the desert that helps decrease the amount of dust storms. And when we drive through these dunes, we change their shape and drastically increases the amount of dust storms. After World War II, after our fighting in North Africa, it was discovered that dust storms were happening at half the wind velocity that was required to create them before. And the effects of World War II in North Africa have not yet been undone. We're still living with those effects, or the people in that area are still living with those effects. But our Army didn't just sit there. It did do things, particularly the Air Force. We did a lot of bombing. And the effects of that bombing is one of the more severe environmental effects that hasn't gotten a lot of attention yet. We all know about the oil fires. They're real hard to ignore. We all know about the oil slick. Those got some press. We all know that there was bombing, and a lot of it, but we don't hear about what went on the ground. A lot of people died on the ground, as far as we can tell. The Pentagon gave us a lot of stuff on how they were using smart bombs, and that was not the majority of the material, or not the majority of the weapons we used. Most of them were not smart bombs, and one could debate the idea of a smart bomb in the first place. But most of the bombs we used were just conventional bombs without any radar or computers guiding them. And among those bombs are ones called earth penetrators. What an earth penetrator is designed to do is you drop it, it burrows down 200 feet and then explodes upward, which not only kills anything above it, but dislodges an incredible amount of soil. The Middle East is sort of ripe for erosion in the first place. Erosion is a problem that's been going on in the Middle East for 2,000 years. Well, suddenly all of the topsoil, or not all, but a lot of topsoil has been loosened, just blown out of its original place. So we're going to see a great deal of increased erosion from earth penetrators. There's going to be a great deal of shrapnel, which it's hard to determine what kind of effect that will have on the lives of the people in the area. There's going to be, well, then comes the problems of the smart bombs. The smart bombs, while smart, aren't geniuses, and a lot of them did not explode. And when a smart bomb doesn't explode, it just stays there. It doesn't disarm. It stays there and waits to blow up. What will probably happen is many of these bombs will explode when they come in contact with metal, say the plow of a farmer. When a farmer, in the future, when farmers are plowing their fields in these areas trying to make a living, it's very possible that they will strike these bombs with their plow and they'll be killed by the resulting explosion. This happens very frequently in Vietnam. There are, I don't know the number of casualties every year, but many, many casualties every year from unexploded bombs from 20 years ago in Vietnam. So in addition to the effect that the bombs themselves will have, we also have to consider what was bombed in Saudi Arabia. in Iraq. We went after the chemical weapons plants. We went after the nuclear plants because we wanted, and the biological weapon plants, because we wanted to get rid of their ability to use these incredibly devastating weapons. Well, one thing to keep in mind is when you blow up a chemical weapons stockpile or factory, it doesn't just go away. It isn't completely incinerated. It's not like Star Trek where you hit it with a phaser and it disappears. When you hit a chemical weapons plant, things are released. We know they had mustard gas. We know they had nerve gas. We know they had phosphogen. And when the expected effects of when a nerve gas plant or stockpile is hit are estimated to be somewhat like that of Bhopal. I don't know if you folks remember the news from a few years back about the Bhopal incident where there was an explosion at a chemical or a fertilizer factory and pesticide factory in India, and it caused the deaths of a few thousand people and blindness and lung damage to tens of thousands more. In all likelihood, this is what's happened next to each of these chemical weapons plants if there were civilians near them, and there probably were. One thing I'll read from this paper produced by the Political Ecology Group is, before war broke out, the London Guardian analyzed the potential impacts of bombing the Samara plant. A direct hit on the storage bunker at the Samara factory, said the Guardian, would release an immense plume of toxic vapor which would disperse to kill every living thing it touched. That's pretty scary. We were told that we weren't striking civilians in that area, but we were. We weren't intentionally sometimes, but the effects still happen. As they say, given prevailing wind, such a cloud would probably not blow over Samara and its population of 70,000. In addition to what it does to the humans in the area, is that cloud probably wouldn't stop at Samara either, but go into the Tigris River and pollute that river to an incredible extent, which would have negative effects on life further down the river, both human and plant and animal. We also attacked biological weapons facilities, and we do know that they had anthrax. If these facilities were damaged and the anthrax released, then it's likely that there will be dead zones in Iraq, areas that will not support life for the next 40 years. Anything, not just us, but any other mammal will die in those areas until then. And then there's the nuclear possibility. We got rid of those nuclear power plants as well. As General General H. Norman Schwarzkopf stated, he had very high confidence that those nuclear reactors have been thoroughly damaged and will not be effective for some number of years. Once again, when you hit a nuclear facility like a chemical facility, it doesn't just go away. It releases something. And plutonium and uranium are some of the most toxic elements that exist to our knowledge. I think I remember correctly that a fraction of a gram of plutonium is enough to be fatal to the average person, or to any person, even an extraordinary person. So, bombing had a lot of effects, erosion, and also effects on the people in the area from exploding the chemical, nuclear, and biological weapons facilities. And as I said, that affects the water. Not only is it possible for water to go into the Tigris and Euphrates, but it's also possible for these chemicals from the plants that have been blown up to leach into the groundwater. You add that with the destruction of the irrigation systems that undoubtedly happened while we were bombing, and add that to the erosion created from the bombing as well, or the loosened soil, and you've got a major erosion problem, which again affects water quality. And then lastly, something that I heard just recently on the news was, as I think many of us know, there are over 600 oil fires burning in the Middle East, and we've all been assured that they've hired the world's leading oil fire experts to put them out. About a week ago, I heard on the news that they had attempted for the first time to put one out and failed because they didn't have enough water. So they were talking about having to wait until they had a virtually unlimited supply of water, which they will bring in from the Persian Gulf in pipelines that used to carry oil. So this sounds all well and good, but what it means is they're going to be dumping a virtually unlimited amount of salt water on the area where these oil fires are. This amount of water from the Persian Gulf is saline, and as you dump this amount of water on the ground to put out the fires, it will inevitably seep down into the water table and salinate the groundwater of the area. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are already having problems with their groundwater. It's running out rapidly. This will take the cake. In all likelihood, or I shouldn't say likelihood, no one knows for sure, but it seems quite likely to me that the groundwater of that area is going to be polluted beyond the ability for humans to use it for either consumption or irrigation. From my view of things, it doesn't look very pleasant to be a farmer in Iraq any longer. The little topsoil you had washed away. The water you would use to irrigate it with is polluted by salt or chemicals. When you try and plow your field, you're running a risk of being blown apart by unexploded weaponry. It's not going to be pleasant. As Vicki said, the area between the Tigris and Euphrates, the cradle of civilization, may have given rise to the image of the Garden of Eden. Well, from the footage I've seen from that part of the world, and from putting all of this together in my imagination, it would seem like that part of the world is now the image of hell. And it seems a great travesty that that's happened. But I don't think that's the only travesty. As I mentioned earlier, the Bush administration is interested in weakening the few environmental controls that exist for the military. They're also interested in the name of national security and getting into wilderness areas and national refuge areas to get the oil. They've released a national energy policy that does not even mention conservation and stresses instead nuclear power, which is a very bad idea, and also mentions getting into those wilderness areas. As I said, I think that this is a great travesty that's unveiling itself before us. And to me, it doesn't matter who's to blame, but I think it's important that we learn from it and learn from it fast.
Thanks, JV. Another consequence of the taking out the irrigation system that they're already experiencing is the spread of disease, because the water system is important for sanitation. I'm going to try and go through some of the information that I've been able to gather from international sources, Greenpeace, various foreign correspondents, and even domestic ones. It's very hard to get information about the environmental consequences of this war for a number of reasons. The main one is the censorship by the military. In fact, on January 25th, the government issued an order that blocked environmental impacts being explored of the war, and that was not rescinded until March 22nd. So no one was allowed to, in the Environmental Protection Agency or any other government agency, even to investigate what might have been taking place. Also, apparently that applied to the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Aeronautics Administration, who are the ones who do the weather and the satellites and explore climate and climate changes and atmospheric changes. They were not allowed to distribute or print any of their satellite pictures during that period of time. One of the things we are beginning to find out about is the oil fires. The estimate is as much as 6 million barrels of oil a day are burning. That's twice the daily output of Kuwait when it was pre-war, when it was producing oil. That's the high estimate. It may be somewhat lower than that, but nevertheless, that's a huge amount of burning oil. And one of the things one of the effects that immediately has is during March, apparently the temperature dropped from 40 degrees, or from 70 degrees to 40 degrees in Kuwait. That instead of entering a warm period, the overcast created, a second, not quite a winter, but considerably cooler temperatures, which could have a number of impacts. And one estimate is that if the fires burned, a lot of the estimates I'm going to have to do is if the fires burn for a year. First of all, it's probably going to be at least 3 years before they're put out, for some of the reasons you indicated, especially getting the water there. It might even be 10 years. But looking at 1 year, if the fires burn for 1 year, it would produce acid rain that would fall on Kuwait for sure, and several hundred miles downstream, including perhaps, or downwind, including perhaps all the way to the tip of Africa. And of course, acid rain is a pretty devastating consequence. The Scientific American, working on the estimate of 6 million barrels a day, are looking at 100,000 tons of soot-laden smoke being emitted daily. If 1% of the smoke reaches the stratosphere by the end of the year, it could cause the temperature to drop by 2 degrees Celsius or even more. And that's an estimate. They don't know how much it's going to get up to the stratosphere. So far, the Pentagon has been saying it will stay at a low level, which it will probably for a few months. But in the next couple of months, they'll hit the warm season, and that'll completely change the wind patterns and heat it up, and it may well rise. And this is an assumption also that only 10% of what's being burned will produce soot, that the soot will be rising. Even with that estimate, it's in a year's time, soot from these fires will reach Hawaii, for example. And we don't know how much of an effect it will have on the amount of sunlight in the area, but that will also probably cause it to drop. Also, burning oil releases various toxic chemicals in addition to hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides, and trace metals. Again, so far the reports are that there's very little of that, though the British, for example, report the closer you are to the fire, the more of that there are. One agricultural scientist predicts that this soot could have a cooling effect on the cotton crop in the lower Soviet Union. I think I'll show you on this map how the winds are going to carry this stuff. The oil is burning in Kuwait, and the prevailing wind will go across and up through Asia and circulate around the world. This area of the Soviet Union has a tremendous amount of agriculture. So as it drops into that area, it could affect the cotton crop and also the wheat crop. You'll notice that the Himalayan mountains is on a direct line with that, as well as the Indian subcontinent. One of the things that they have definitely gotten information on is that there is tar. Skiers have come up with tar on their skis in the Himalayan mountains. And so it is apparently landing there, which was not predicted as far as being keeping it low level. It raises several possibilities. One is that the soot is going to affect the albedo, which is the reflectivity of the snow, and create snow belts. Also, it suggests that it could be traveling much farther and much faster than than the Pentagon and others were predicting that it would be going. And that has definitely been reported. The other thing, as far as the air pollution goes, is that, as you pointed out, that simply disturbing the deserts are probably as dangerous and long-lasting of an effect, more so even than the burning oil. That the particulates in the air are likely to be in the area and cause longer range problems than the burning oil, which could be around for even for a number of years. So these are just the preliminary reports that people are able to notice. A lot of the global impacts on climate and weather patterns and agriculture in places considerably farther away than the Gulf. Nations who were essentially bystanders to this whole thing could be quite devastating. And it's clear that any major war that happens on the planet at this point affects everywhere on the planet, and with increasingly devastating and extensive effects.
Yeah, that's a point I'd kind of like to elaborate on a little bit. The idea that there is no over there anymore. There never was. But I think we're becoming painfully aware that things don't just happen in this isolated spot somewhere else, that anything we do on this planet affects everything else everywhere else. It's really a tragedy, and it's real scary that a lot of the nations who had nothing to do with this will probably be the ones harmed. Maybe not the most by it. I think Iraq's going to be the worst off in this situation, but countries like India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, Russia, these folks are going to suffer for something that they had nothing to do with. I think that's real disturbing. One thing I had heard about a possibility with the oil fires, and I haven't heard anything recently on this, Jim, is the idea that if certain toxins from the oil fires get high enough in the atmosphere, there's a possibility to create yet another hole in the atmosphere, so that not only will we have them on both poles, but we'll have one traipsing around the equator as well.
You mean a hole in the ozone?
Yeah.
Yeah, that some of the stuff released by military destruction and waste, military weapons, are hydrochlorofluorins, which are what contributes to the ozone layer. I think the main hazard, though, is simply the soot and some of the toxic nitric oxide and so on, but mainly just the burning of the oil itself, the creating a winter type effect, a nuclear winter type effect, is what they're looking at mostly.
And as you're saying, this is already happening. This is not just theory. This is...
Yeah, and even with the sketchy ability to, for example, no one's been able to see the weather satellite shots of the area during the war. Those were restricted. But even with what people are able to observe, one of the consequences of the global impact is that you also can't disguise the effects very long, so that people in faraway places in Florida, for example, have noticed impacts. So a lot of the weather watchers have already picked up on what's been taking place.
Mm-hmm. Something that, again, I had just heard and just popped back into my head about the oil fires is that obviously when you burn oil, you release an incredible amount of carbon. And while it will have a nuclear winter effect in the local area, I had read that it's possible that it could step up the global warming by 20 years.
Apparently not. From the scientists that I've read, it will contribute to it, but nowhere near the amount of what developed civilization is using. And just a case in point is, for example, the Pentagon uses enough energy in a year to provide mass transit in the entire country for 14 years. So I think that just the amount of oil that our military machine, for example, consumes is contributing much larger to global warming than these oil fires probably will.
Once again, I find myself imagining what it's going to be like to be a farmer in Iraq at this time.
Well, another consequence that isn't being publicized is the direct health impact on people in Kuwait, including the several 100,000 American soldiers who have been told that there's no health problem, as one was quoted as saying, well, in 20 years they'll probably tell us it's like Agent Orange. They're breathing the smoke in every day, noticing it. You can see it in the air, and they say they taste oil. But yet the official statement is that it's no worse than, say, New York City or London in terms of pollution. So,
which maybe should cause us to look at New York City and London and the health hazards of living there. Wow. Yeah, I can, just thinking of adding the problem of reduced temperature to the problems I had talked about earlier that you face as an Iraqi farmer. It's not going to be a pleasant situation. And you'd mentioned that there appears to be one of the other effects of damaging the irrigation system and the sewer system is there's been an increase in disease and epidemics.
There's apparently, from what I've heard, a cholera epidemic already. Just the lack of sanitation. The river system was everything. It was, irrigation and sanitation, and they bathed in it. They used it as a latrine, everything. So the U.S. targeted there weren't very many military targets in Iraq, so they targeted things that were of military usefulness, and that would include bridges, dams, lots of different things. Apparently they blew up one bridge at 4 in the afternoon and killed 47 people. It just, anything that could be used by the military would also be being used extensively by the civilian population. And as you pointed out, only 7% of the bombs dropped were smart bombs.
Which means 93% were just the conventional weapons that we've used in every war since World War II.
Right.
And I think that's an important thing to note, because we've been led to believe through all these spiffy videos we've seen on television that it was all smart bombs that were at specific targets, and what really went on was carpet bombing.
Yeah, we apparently dropped the same or more bombs, more destructive power and bombs in the little war in the Gulf than we did in the last 14 months of the war against Japan in World War II. That's counting both atom bombs.
Wow.
So we dumped a lot of stuff there.
Wow.
Well, thanks for coming down and sharing what you've got, and I think that it's clear that at this day and age, with the great hero of the war supposedly was our great technical firepower, and yet that is by itself so destructive and that we can't afford to use it as a world anymore.
Just one more thing, Jim. There was an article in today's Missoulian in which critics at the Pentagon are telling us that our spiffy war weaponry didn't work nearly as well as we were told it did, and didn't hit the right targets frequently. It's worth checking out as well. I find myself thinking about everything that's been discussed, and it's kind of a depressing subject,
Yeah, it is.
kind of a depressing talk, and I hope folks that watch this don't come out of this with the feeling that everything is over, or not over, but that there's nothing we can do and that the world's just going to grind to a polluted end. And I hope that people don't get depressed by this, and that they use this information to urge them to take immediate action to make the world a better place environmentally for all of us, to start calling the Bush administration on some of the things they're doing in terms of an energy policy and their desire to get into wilderness areas. I think it's real important that we not become overwhelmed by this information, but rather use it as a way to urge ourselves into doing something now.
Well, absolutely. I think the important thing that we were able to do here is open up some of the myths and things that have been covered up, the pretension that this was a safe and clean war, and then we can move beyond that to where we don't do war again. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.